At a glittering corporate gala, a powerful woman throws out a joke, never expecting the quiet man cleaning the floors to take her up on it. Moments later, the lobby fills with the sound of Chopin, not just notes, but a story in every chord. The world stops to listen, and a single viral video changes both of their lives overnight. But behind the music is a buried history of betrayal, a shuttered community center, and a secret that could destroy them both. As the spotlight grows hotter, whispers turn to accusations, and a choice must be made between protecting reputations or telling the truth. How far will they go for justice, for love, and for the song that started it all? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale Tower's top-floor ballroom. Inside, the annual shareholder gala was a sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored suits. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the gathered elite of Chicago's business world, their champagne glasses creating a constant symphony of delicate clinks. Miranda Hale stood at the podium, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her navy silk dress a subtle statement of power, but beneath her polished exterior, tension coiled in her shoulders. The past week's headlines about Hale Systems layoffs had been brutal, accusing the company of targeting minority employees disproportionately. She'd prepared for tough questions, but the young journalist from the Tribune was particularly relentless. He stood now, press badge gleaming, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Given recent events, some say you're out of touch with real people. Care to comment on how a CEO making $30 million annually can understand the struggles of ordinary workers?" Miranda's fingers tightened around her glass of wine. She'd been drinking it slowly throughout the evening, trying to steady her nerves. The alcohol had softened the sharp edges of her anxiety, but now it loosened her tongue in a way she'd later regret. "Out of touch?" She gave a light laugh that echoed through the mic. "I started in accounting, you know. I can still do my own taxes, play the piano, and make a mean pot roast. I'm not exactly Marie Antoinette." Scattered chuckles rippled through the crowd, but the journalist pressed on. "So, you're saying wealth hasn't changed you at all?" Something in his tone, the mockery, the assumption, pricked at Miranda's pride. She lifted her chin, wine-warmed confidence surging through her veins. "Tell you what," she said, smiling broadly, "play Chopin and I'll marry you." The ballroom erupted in surprised laughter. Phone cameras flashed. Miranda realized, too late, that her microphone was still live, broadcasting her flippant remark to every corner of the room. She saw Robert Hale, her father, shake his head slightly from his seat at the front table. Several guests exchanged glances, some amused, others calculating. The journalist's eyebrows shot up, and he was already typing on his phone. Miranda could practically see the tweets forming. In the corner of the vast room, near the mahogany-topped bar, Eli Carter moved quietly between the tables, gathering empty glasses onto his tray. His dark hands, marked with years of work but still elegant, moved with practiced efficiency. He'd been watching the exchange while doing his rounds, his face carefully neutral as he heard Miranda's impulsive declaration. While others laughed or whispered, Eli's expression remained unreadable, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that went far beyond the glittering surface of the evening. He continued his work, invisible to most of the wealthy crowd, yet acutely aware of every nuance in the room. Miranda cleared her throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, I think we all need a little humor these days," she said smoothly. "Now, about our fourth quarter projections." But the moment had already crystallized, captured by dozens of phones and cameras. As Miranda steered the conversation back to safer territory, Eli moved between the tables like a shadow, collecting glasses that still held the lingering warmth of hands that had never known real labor. His weathered fingers, which held secrets the room's occupants couldn't imagine, wrapped carefully around each crystal stem. The night continued its practice dance of wealth and power, but something had shifted. Miranda's words hung in the air like the lingering notes of an unfinished song, While in the corner, Eli Carter simply worked, his silence holding more wisdom than all the evening's carefully crafted speeches combined. The last traces of laughter and conversation faded as the gala's final guests drifted toward the bank of gleaming elevators. Their shoes clicked against marble floors, echoing through Hale Tower's vast lobby. Crystal glasses sat abandoned on window ledges, lipstick marks and floating olive picks the only evidence of the evening's festivities. Eli Carter moved methodically through the space, his cleaning cart's wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. Decades of experience had taught him the best way to restore order after these events. Start from the edges and work inward, gathering debris like a gentle tide. The lobby's baby grand piano stood sentinel in the corner, its lid closed and surface dulled by a thin film of dust. It had been there so long most people walked past without noticing, treating it like just another piece of corporate furniture. But Eli noticed. He always noticed. Tonight, something about the quiet and the way moonlight spilled through the windows made his fingers itch. He glanced at his watch, 11:45 p.m. The night shift had barely begun, and his hands already ached from lifting heavy trays and scrubbing tables upstairs. Eli paused his cart beside the piano. The security cameras would catch him, but he'd learned long ago which guards appreciated a little music during their late shifts. With careful reverence, he lifted the lid and ran one calloused finger along the ivory keys. The piano needed tuning, but it wasn't beyond hope. He settled onto the bench, adjusting it with the familiarity of someone who'd spent countless hours at similar instruments. His work-worn hands hovered over the keys for a moment as he closed his eyes, letting the music rise in his mind. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated into the empty space. Eli's touch was gentle but sure, coaxing warmth from the neglected strings. The melody unfurled like a prayer, each phrase shaped with the kind of understanding that came only from carrying a piece of music in your heart for decades. As he played, the stiffness in his joints seemed to melt away. The lobby's harsh fluorescent lights softened in his mind, replaced by memories of concert halls and church sanctuaries, of his wife Lila's smile as she listened from the front pew. His body swayed slightly as the music built, the harmonies growing richer, more complex. The nocturne's middle section emerged with quiet intensity, Eli's left hand providing a heartbeat pulse while his right wove delicate patterns above. Each note rang true against the marble walls, filling the space with something that felt like healing. He was so lost in the music that he didn't hear the click of heels approaching from the elevator bank. Miranda Hale stood frozen in the doorway, one hand clutching her forgotten coat. The familiar melody wrapped around her like a physical thing, squeezing her chest until she could barely breathe. Eli's interpretation wasn't showy or technically perfect, but it carried something deeper, a soulfulness that stripped away all pretense. The final progression began, each chord more questioning than the last, until the final notes hung in the air like stars. The silence that followed felt sacred. Miranda's eyes shone with unexpected tears, her carefully maintained composure cracking at the edges. She hadn't heard this piece since Daniel. Her son had played it at his last recital, just weeks before the accident. She pressed her fingers to her lips, trying to hold back the flood of memory. Eli's hands stilled on the keys. Without hurry or embarrassment, he closed the lid and stood, straightening his gray uniform jacket. When he turned and saw Miranda, he offered a small, dignified nod, as if they'd simply passed in a hallway. Then, he returned to his cart, retrieving a microfiber cloth to begin dusting the lobby's massive reception desk. His movements were unhurried and precise, showing no sign of the passion that had poured through his fingers moments before. From behind a potted palm near the security desk, a young woman in a sequined dress lowered her phone, her thumb hovering over the upload button. The video was already trimmed and tagged, Chopin Janitor. Miranda's office gleamed in the morning light, all glass and chrome stretching 40 stories above Chicago. She sat behind her desk, scrolling through overnight emails about the gala's fallout, her jaw tense. The discriminatory layoff allegations hadn't gone away. They never did with just one party. The sharp click of heels against marble warned her seconds before her office door burst open. Sarah Chen, her head of PR, rushed in with 2 junior staffers trailing behind, all clutching tablets and phones. "Miranda, you need to see this right now," Sarah said, her usual professional calm cracking with excitement. Miranda steeled herself. "How bad is it?" "Bad? It's incredible." Sarah turned her tablet around. "Look at these headlines." Miranda blinked at the screen. CEO's Dare Answered by Janitor's Stunning Chopin, Chicago Tribune. She grabbed the tablet, scrolling through more headlines. "Wait, what? Someone recorded him last night. The night janitor, playing that piano in the lobby after the gala. It's everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. They're calling him the Chopin janitor." The junior staffers chimed in with numbers and statistics, but Miranda barely heard them. She was watching the video. Eli Carter at the piano, his work uniform crisp despite the late hour, his hands moving across the keys with grace that belonged in a concert hall. The nocturne in E-flat major filled her office through Sarah's tablet speakers. "The comments are overwhelmingly positive," Sarah continued. "People love the contrast, the humble janitor with this incredible hidden talent, and they're praising you too." "Me?" Miranda looked up sharply. "Yes, they're calling it a perfect response to that reporter's out-of-touch comment. Here, listen. Who knew Miranda Hale's company had such hidden gems? Maybe she knows her people better than we thought." Sarah beamed. "We couldn't have planned better PR if we tried." Across town in a modest South Side neighborhood, Eli walked out his front door for his morning paper. Mrs. Watson from next door waved from her porch, more animated than usual. "Eli Carter, why didn't you tell me you were famous?" He paused, newspaper in hand. "Ma'am?" "It's all over my granddaughter's phone. You playing that beautiful music last night. She showed me the video this morning, called you the Chopin something or other." Eli's expression shifted to quiet bewilderment. "Someone recorded that? Millions of people have seen it. My Jasmine says you're trending." Mrs. Watson said the word carefully, like it was in a foreign language. "It's about time people saw what you can do. I've been telling folks for years about your playing at church." Eli just shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It was just a moment with an empty piano, Mrs. Watson. Nothing special." "Nothing special? Child, please." She waved her hand dismissively. "That music was straight from heaven, and now everybody knows it." Back in her penthouse that evening, Miranda sat in her living room, the city lights twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Her laptop glowed in the dim light as she played the video again. Her untouched glass of Cabernet sat on the coffee table, forgotten. She watched Eli's hands, really watched them this time. They moved with such certainty, such tender authority over the keys. The music wasn't just played, it was revealed, like he was uncovering something that had always been there, waiting. In the video's harsh fluorescent lighting, his face remained serene, eyes half closed as the nocturne poured through him. Miranda touched her spacebar, freezing the frame. She knew that piece, had played it herself, years ago. But never like this. Never with such. She couldn't find the word. Grace? Soul? Whatever it was, it made her chest ache in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. The light on her phone blinked with another news alert about Chopin janitor. Miranda closed her laptop, suddenly unable to watch anymore. The wine stayed untouched as she stood and walked to her window, staring out at the city that looked so different from up here than it did from the lobby where Eli played. In all her years running Hale Systems, she'd passed that lobby piano hundreds of times without a second glance. How many other moments of beauty had she missed, rushing past in her designer heels, eyes fixed on the next meeting, the next crisis, the next quarterly report. The city lights blurred as she pressed her forehead against the cool glass. For the first time in years, Miranda Hale had no idea what her next move should be. The fluorescent lights hummed in the basement break room, casting a harsh glow over the metal tables and well-worn chairs. Eli sat with his lunch, a simple sandwich and an apple. While nearby, Aisha Brooks peered intently at her phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "Mr. Carter!" Aisha's voice bounced off the concrete walls. "You're not going to believe what I found." She scooted her chair closer, the metal legs scraping against the floor. Her enthusiasm radiated as she held up her phone, showing a grainy YouTube video from years ago. "Is this you?" she asked, though the answer was clear in her eyes. On the small screen, a younger Eli sat at a gleaming grand piano, his posture perfect, his fingers dancing across the keys. The video quality was poor, but the sound of Rachmaninoff filled the break room. Below the video, the title read, 1973 Chicago Youth Piano Championship, winner Elijah Carter. Eli's sandwich paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, his eyes fixed on the teenage version of himself in the video. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly. "I got curious after the whole viral thing yesterday," Aisha said, tucking a braided lock behind her ear. "Started digging around online. You were amazing. What happened after this? Did you go to music school?" Eli reached for his paper napkin, methodically wiping his fingers. "Life takes different turns sometimes, Miss Brooks. But you were incredible." Aisha's dark eyes sparkled with curiosity. "You could have been a concert pianist or something. Instead, She caught herself, looking embarrassed. "Instead, I clean floors?" Eli's voice held no bitterness, just a gentle amusement. "There's no shame in honest work." "That's not what I meant," Aisha backpedaled. "It's just, you have this incredible talent. Don't you ever wish things had gone differently?" Eli took a slow sip from his water bottle. "Wishing doesn't change what is. Besides, music isn't about stages and spotlights. It's about what happens between you and those keys in the quiet moments." Upstairs, in the executive suite, Miranda sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, I need everything you can find on him. Employment records, background check, the usual." She paused, listening. "His name is Elijah Carter. He works nights, maintenance staff." Her assistant's voice crackled through the phone. "The janitor who plays Chopin?" Miranda winced at the description. "Yes, him. Just be discreet about it." She hung up and turned to her computer, where the viral video played on mute. The way his hands moved across the keys spoke of years of training, not just natural talent. There was a story there, she was sure of it. Hours later, Eli unlocked the door to his small apartment on the south side. The space was neat but worn, with carefully maintained furniture that had seen better days. A upright piano, old but well cared for, stood against one wall. He set his keys in the wooden bowl by the door, next to a stack of mail. His eyes fell on an envelope he knew all too well, yellowed with age, the Chicago Conservatory logo still visible in the corner. The postmark dated back to 1974. With careful movements, he picked up the envelope. The paper was soft from years of handling, though it had never been opened. He knew every crease, every smudge on its surface. For a moment, he stood there, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Then, with the same gentle care he'd shown for decades, he opened the drawer of his side table and placed the envelope back inside. The last rays of sunset filtered through his window as he closed the drawer, leaving the past safely tucked away once more. Miranda's heels clicked against the marble floor as she hurried toward the executive boardroom. The urgent message from her assistant had interrupted her morning coffee. "Emergency board meeting called by Mr. Hale. Immediate attendance required." She smoothed her navy blazer, took a steadying breath, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. Around the gleaming conference table sat 12 board members, with her father, Robert Hale, at the head. His silver hair caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and his practiced smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miranda, dear, Thank you for joining us so promptly. Robert gestured to the empty chair beside him. We've been discussing the recent social media situation. Miranda settled into her seat, shoulders tense. If you're referring to the video, our PR team reports it's actually helping counter the negative press from the layoffs. Precisely. Robert's voice boomed with enthusiasm that made Miranda's skin prickle. Which is why we've developed a strategy to maximize this opportunity. Thomas Chen, the youngest board member, slid a glossy presentation folder across the table. Miranda opened it to find photos of a dilapidated building, its windows boarded up, graffiti marking its brick walls. She recognized it immediately, the Southside Community Arts Center. 5 years ago, Robert continued, when we had to close the manufacturing facility in that neighborhood, this center was unfortunately caught in the economic fallout. Now, we can turn that narrative around. Miranda's stomach clenched. She remembered signing off on that closure, though she hadn't known about the arts center at the time. The manufacturing plant's shutdown had devastated the local community. We propose, Robert said, standing to command the room. A charity concert. You and this talented janitor, Mr. Carter, is it? Performing together to raise funds for reopening the center. The optics would be perfect. Hail systems giving back, breaking down barriers, music bringing people together. A concert? Miranda's voice came out sharper than intended. Father, he's not a performing monkey, he's our employee. Who has already shown himself willing to perform publicly, Robert countered smoothly. And who better to demonstrate our commitment to diversity and inclusion? The words made Miranda's skin crawl. She looked around the table at the nodding heads, all seeing dollar signs and positive press releases. And if I refuse? Robert's smile tightened. Miranda, dear, the board has been very patient with the recent negative publicity. This could be exactly what we need to shore up investor confidence. Without that, he left the threat hanging. We've already drafted a press release, said Patricia Walsh, head of PR, sliding another document forward. We just need you to approach Mr. Carter and secure his participation. Miranda stared at the paper, her father's words echoing in her head. The threat to her position was clear: play along or step aside. She thought of the thousands of employees who depended on her leadership, the changes she'd been trying to implement from within. I'll speak with him, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Excellent, Robert clapped his hands together. We'll schedule the announcement for next week. The meeting dispersed, board members filing out with satisfied smiles. Robert caught Miranda's arm as she stood to leave. This is for the best, dear, he said softly. Sometimes we need to be creative in how we handle public relations. Miranda pulled her arm free and walked out without responding. That evening, she found Eli in the lobby, methodically mopping the marble floor. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, and the fresh pine scent of cleaning solution hung in the air. He looked up as she approached, his movements steady and purposeful. Mr. Carter, she said, then hesitated. How did one ask a janitor to perform in a charity concert without sounding condescending? Do you have a moment? Eli propped his mop against a wall and turned to face her fully. Of course, Miss Hale. The board, she began, then started again. We're planning a charity benefit to reopen the Southside Community Arts Center. She watched his expression carefully, but it remained neutral. We were hoping you might consider performing with me. The same center that closed when Hail Systems shut down the factory? His voice was quiet but direct. Miranda felt heat rise in her cheeks. Yes, we want to make things right. We? Eli's eyes met hers steadily. Or the board wants good publicity? The question hung in the air between them. Miranda could have bristled at his directness, could have reminded him of their respective positions, but something in his calm dignity made such responses impossible. Both, she admitted. But the center would reopen. That has to count for something. Eli was quiet for a long moment, looking past her at the grand piano that stood in the corner of the lobby. I'll do it, he said finally. But I have one condition. Miranda waited, surprised by the relief she felt at his acceptance. The center needs to be truly reopened, he said, with real community involvement in its leadership, not just a corporate showcase. I'm not sure I can promise that, Miranda said honestly. The board? Then I'm not sure I can perform, Eli replied, reaching for his mop again. Some things matter more than music, Ms. Hale. Miranda thought of her father's threat, of the press releases already drafted, of the momentum they'd lose if this fell through. But she also thought of the way Eli had played that nocturne, with such deep understanding and grace. What if I guarantee it personally? She heard herself say. Community leadership, real reopening. You have my word. Eli studied her face for a long moment. Then yes, he said finally, I'll rehearse with you. The bright lights of the Hale Systems press room blazed overhead as Miranda stood at the polished wooden podium. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, creating a symphony of mechanical noise. To her right, Eli Carter stood quietly in a freshly pressed navy suit that the PR team had insisted he wear. His usual work uniform had been deemed not appropriate for the occasion. The room buzzed with reporters and photographers, their equipment creating a forest of microphones and lenses. Miranda gripped the edges of the podium, her manicured nails pressing into the wood as she delivered her prepared statement. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Hale Systems will be hosting a charity benefit concert next month, Miranda said, her voice steady and practiced. The proceeds will go toward reopening the Southside Community Arts Center, a vital cultural institution that has been sorely missed by its community. Eli maintained his dignified posture, but his eyes carried a weight that the cameras couldn't capture. He'd spent countless hours in that arts center before its closure, teaching neighborhood kids how to play piano when his hands weren't aching from his custodial work. A forest of hands shot up as Miranda finished her statement. She pointed to a reporter in the front row, a young woman in a red blazer. Sarah Chin, Chicago Tribune. The reporter introduced herself. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to go from night janitor to concert pianist in the span of a week? Eli leaned toward the microphone. Music's always been part of who I am, he said simply. The job title doesn't change that. His response drew appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Another reporter stood up without waiting to be called on. James Morrison, Entertainment Weekly, he announced. Ms. Hale, about your viral statement at the gala, will you be keeping your promise to marry anyone who plays Chopin? The room erupted in knowing chuckles. Camera flashes intensified, casting stark shadows across Miranda's face. She felt her carefully constructed poise waver for a moment, but years of corporate training kicked in. She offered a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Play Chopin with me at the benefit, Mr. Carter, she said, turning slightly to face Eli. Then we'll talk. The room exploded with laughter and camera flashes. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Eli's expression remained neutral, but those closest to the stage might have noticed his hands, clasped behind his back, tighten ever so slightly. The PR team quickly wrapped up the conference, but not before the moment had been immortalized in dozens of photos and video clips. As they were ushered off the stage, Miranda couldn't help but notice how Eli moved with the same quiet dignity he showed while mopping floors or playing piano, as if the spotlight meant nothing to him. Later that afternoon, in the familiar dim light of the basement break room, Eli sat at the weathered break table, his borrowed suit jacket draped over a nearby chair. Aisha Brooks perched on the edge of the table, scrolling through news coverage on her phone. You're trending again? She announced, shaking her head. They're calling it the Chopin Challenge. Some betting sites are even taking odds on whether there'll be a wedding. Eli unscrewed the lid of his thermos, steam from his coffee rising in the cool basement air. Folks sure love a show, he said quietly. But Mr. C, this is huge. Aisha's enthusiasm bubbled over. You could use this attention to really make something happen with the Arts Center. Get it back to what it used to be. Eli took a slow sip of his coffee, considering his words carefully. That center was more than just a building, Aisha. It was hope, It was possibility. Kids who couldn't afford lessons got to touch a piano for the first time there. Some found their voice, some found their purpose. And now it could happen again, Aisha insisted. Eli set down his thermos, the metal clinking against the table. Maybe, but everything comes with a price, even good intentions. What do you mean? Words mean more when folks are listening, Eli said, echoing what he'd told Miranda at the gala. His tone carried the weight of someone who had seen too many promises made and broken in the spotlight's glare. The morning sun struggled to warm the frozen February air as Miranda's BMW pulled up to Grace Community Church. The small brick building stood humble but dignified against the gray sky, its stained glass windows catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Miranda checked her reflection in the rear-view mirror, smoothing her cashmere sweater before stepping out into the biting wind. The wooden doors creaked as she entered the sanctuary. The sound of piano music drifted through the air, not Chopin this time, but an old hymn that made the empty pews seem less lonely. Miranda paused in the entrance, taking in the sight of Eli at the upright piano near the altar. His fingers moved with gentle authority across the keys, and his eyes were closed in quiet concentration. "Welcome to Grace, Mrs. Hale." The warm voice startled Miranda. She turned to find Reverend Pearl McKinney standing beside her, a knowing smile on her kind face. The older woman's silver hair was neatly styled, and her purple cardigan added a spot of cheerful color to the winter morning. "Thank you, Reverend," Miranda replied, suddenly feeling like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. "I appreciate you letting us use the church for practice. This old piano's seen many stories," Reverend Pearl said, her eyes twinkling, "and it keeps all their secrets." She patted Miranda's arm and moved past her toward her office. "Take all the time you need." Eli finished the hymn and turned on the bench as Miranda approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale." "Please call me Miranda," she said, setting her purse down. "We should probably be on a first-name basis if we're going to perform together." Eli nodded and scooted over on the bench, making room for her. Miranda sat down stiffly, keeping a careful distance between them. The ivory keys stretched out before her like old friends she'd abandoned long ago. "When was the last time you played?" Eli asked quietly. Miranda's throat tightened. She stared at the keys, not trusting herself to look at him. 10 years ago," she said finally. "After my son Daniel's accident." Eli was silent for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in the space between them. "I'm sorry," he said simply. No platitudes, no awkward attempts at comfort, just acknowledgement of her loss. "He loved Chopin," Miranda continued, surprising herself. She hadn't spoken about Daniel's music to anyone in years. The Nocturne was his favorite piece. He was working on it for a recital when she stopped, her fingers trembling slightly above the keys. "Music has a way of holding our memories," Eli said. He placed his hands on the keys. "Shall we begin?" Miranda nodded, grateful for his gentle redirect. Eli started playing the opening measures of the Nocturne, his touch delicate but sure. When it came time for Miranda's part, her fingers felt like wooden blocks, stiff and uncooperative. "Stop thinking about the keys," Eli suggested. "Think about the sound you want to make." They tried again. This time, Miranda closed her eyes, letting muscle memory guide her hands. The notes came hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. When she stumbled over a difficult passage, Eli's steady rhythm kept her grounded. "That's it," he encouraged. "Let it breathe." They worked through the piece, measure by measure. Eli's teaching style was patient but direct, pointing out areas that needed attention without sugarcoating his feedback. As the morning wore on, Miranda felt some of her corporate armor beginning to crack. "You're fighting the piano," Eli observed during their third run-through. "Like you're trying to control every note." "I'm used to being in control," Miranda admitted. "Music isn't about control," he replied. "It's about trust. Trust in yourself, trust in your partner, trust in the silence between the notes." They started again. This time, Miranda tried to relax her shoulders, to let the music flow through her rather than forcing it. The difference was subtle but immediate. The harsh edges of her playing softened, melding more naturally with Eli's accompaniment. Through the window, Miranda caught glimpses of Reverend Pearl moving about the church, straightening hymnals and checking the thermostat. The older woman's presence was comforting somehow, like a guardian angel watching over their unlikely duet. After 2 hours, Eli called for a break. Miranda's hands were tired, but it was a good kind of tired, like waking up muscles that had been sleeping for too long. She stood and walked down the center aisle, running her hand along the worn wooden pews. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, sending ribbons of colored light through the stained glass windows. Something stirred in her chest, an emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't exactly happiness, but it felt like the possibility of happiness, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. Her fingers traced the smooth grooves in the wood, worn down by decades of faithful hands. How many others had sat in these pews, carrying their own grief, their own stories? The piano keys clicked softly behind her as Eli closed the cover. Miranda turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time in 10 years, she had played her son's favorite piece without feeling like she was drowning in sorrow. The grief was still there, but it had shifted somehow, making room for something else, something that felt almost like hope. The routine settled in as naturally as morning sunlight. Each day at 11, Miranda would slip away from her executive meetings, trading her corner office for the worn wooden bench of the church piano. Eli was always there first, his hands moving over the keys in gentle warm-up exercises. On Tuesday, Miranda brought 2 cups of coffee from the expensive shop down the street. "I didn't know how you take it," she said, setting both cups on a nearby pew. "So I brought cream and sugar packets." "Black is fine," Eli said, accepting the cup with a small smile. "My wife used to say coffee should taste like coffee." They worked through the opening measures of the nocturne, Miranda's fingers still hesitant but growing more confident. The sunlight through the stained glass cast colored shadows across the keys. Wednesday found them sharing orange cranberry muffins Eli's neighbor had baked. "Mrs. Johnson still thinks I need feeding up," he chuckled, breaking one in half. "Been trying to fatten me up for 30 years. "These are amazing," Miranda said, savoring the tart sweetness. Her shoulders had begun to lose their boardroom rigidity during these sessions. By Thursday, they were comfortable enough for gentle corrections. "Let the phrase breathe here," Eli would say, demonstrating. "Like you're telling a story, not rushing to the end." "My old teacher would have rapped my knuckles by now," Miranda admitted, trying again. "Music needs patience, not punishment," Eli replied quietly. Friday brought rain that drummed against the church roof, providing a soft percussion to their practice. During a break, Eli's eyes grew distant as he watched the water stream down the windows. "Lila loved days like this," he said softly. Said the rain made everyone slow down and listen better. His fingers traced the edge of the piano. "She taught piano here before the Arts Center opened. Then we moved the lessons there, had proper practice rooms, better instruments. She had such plans for that place." Miranda's hands stilled on the keys. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "She was sunshine in human form," Eli said, a gentle smile warming his face. "Could get any kid to love music, even the ones who came in kicking and complaining. Had this way of making it feel like play instead of practice." He gestured toward the church windows. The Arts Center was her dream come true. Proper classrooms, performance space, chances for kids who couldn't afford private lessons. She'd work with anyone who wanted to learn, figure out payment plans, trade lessons for help cleaning up, sometimes just teach for free if a family was struggling. Miranda's throat felt tight. How many students did she have? "Oh, must have been 50 or 60 at the peak. Had to start a waiting list." Eli's voice held pride tinged with old pain. When the center closed, it broke something in her. Tried to keep teaching here at the church, but it wasn't the same. Lost touch with so many of those kids. He shook his head slightly. "Sorry." getting carried away with old memories. "No, please," Miranda said. "I want to hear." And so, between measures of Chopin, Eli shared stories of Lila's recitals, of children discovering their own music for the first time, of community gatherings where classical pieces mixed freely with gospel and jazz. Miranda listened intently, something unnamed and heavy settling in her chest. That afternoon, Aisha slipped into the back of the church with her phone, capturing their progress. Eli and Miranda had found a rhythm together, their four hands moving in careful synchronization through the familiar notes. "This is gold," Aisha whispered to herself, posting the clip. She added hashtags, Chopin Janitor, Piano Promise, Open the Doors. Within hours, the video had thousands of views. Comments poured in. "Beautiful. When's the concert? How do we donate?" Aisha quickly created a fundraising page for the Arts Center. By evening, small donations were steadily arriving, $5, $20, $50. Not enough yet to reopen a building, but something was starting. In her office that night, Miranda watched the clip Aisha had posted. The camera had caught a moment when both she and Eli smiled at successfully navigating a tricky passage. She looked different. Softer somehow. More like the person she used to be, before boardrooms and bottom lines had hardened her edges. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Donations looking promising. Keep it up." She set the phone face down without replying, the weight in her chest growing heavier as she remembered Eli's stories of the Arts Center's closure. The next morning's coffee would taste bitter, but she didn't know that yet. For now, there was just the music, the growing ease between unlikely partners, and the quiet hope of something being rebuilt, note by careful note. The late morning sun struggled behind heavy snow clouds as Eli flexed his fingers, trying to work out the stiffness that had settled into his joints overnight. The church's old radiator clanked and hissed, fighting against the February chill that crept through the stained glass windows. He'd arrived early to warm up his hands, but today they weren't cooperating like usual. The church door creaked open, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and Miranda Hale, wrapped in a charcoal wool coat. She stamped her boots on the welcome mat, shaking off snow. "Sorry I'm late," she said, unwinding her scarf. "Traffic's awful with this weather." "No need to apologize," Eli said, keeping his tone light despite the dull ache in his knuckles. "Weather like this, everybody moves a little slower." Miranda settled beside him on the piano bench, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume, something subtle and floral. She'd been growing more comfortable with their proximity over the past few days, no longer holding herself quite so rigid. "Should we start with the opening measures?" she asked, reaching for the sheet music. Eli nodded, letting her take the lead. As they began playing, he carefully modulated his touch, compensating for the stiffness in his fingers. The familiar melody filled the empty church, floating up to the rafters, where it mingled with dust motes dancing in the pale winter light. They worked through the piece slowly, Miranda's confidence growing with each passage. When they reached a particularly challenging section, she paused, her hands hovering over the keys. "May I show you something?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Without waiting for an answer, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather wallet. From inside, she carefully extracted a photograph, its edges worn smooth from handling. "This is Daniel," she said, holding it out. At his last recital, Eli studied the image of a young boy seated at a grand piano, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a suit that seemed a size too big. His smile was bright and uncomplicated, the kind only children can manage. "He had talent," Miranda continued, her finger tracing the edge of the photo. "And he loved Chopin, this nocturne especially. He was working on it when—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Music has a way of holding memories," Eli said gently, recognizing the weight of grief in her silence. "Sometimes that makes it harder to play. Sometimes it helps us remember better." Miranda nodded, carefully returning the photo to her wallet. I haven't been able to finish this piece since he died. I'd get partway through and just stop. We don't have to, Eli began, but Miranda was already positioning her hands over the keys. I'd like to try, she said firmly. If you'll play with me? Eli nodded, ignoring the protest in his joints as he placed his hands alongside hers. They began together, the melody rising soft and clear in the empty church. Miranda's playing had changed over their days of practiceless, technically precise, perhaps, but more alive, more feeling. As they moved through the piece, Eli watched her from the corner of his eye. Her face held the same intense focus he'd seen in that old photo of Daniel, and for a moment he could see the connection between them mother and son, bound by more than blood, bound by music. The snow fell harder outside, coating the windows in white. But inside the church, time seemed to slow around the piano. They played on, measure after measure, Miranda's breathing steady and sure. When they reached the section where she usually faltered, she pressed forward, her fingers finding each note with growing confidence. The final chords resonated through the space, hanging in the air like a prayer. Miranda sat very still, her hands resting lightly on the keys. A single tear tracked down her cheek, but she was smiling. Well, she said finally, wiping her face with quick, efficient movements. I suppose that's progress. That was beautiful, Eli said simply, meaning it. He flexed his hands in his lap, out of her sight. Miranda gathered her things, movements precise but unhurried. Same time tomorrow? I'll be here, Eli assured her, standing to walk her to the door. They paused at the entrance, watching the snow swirl in thick flakes. Miranda pulled on her gloves, then turned to him. Thank you, she said quietly. For today. For all of this. Eli just nodded. Holding the door, she stepped out into the storm. He watched as she made her way to her car, her tall figure growing indistinct in the swirling white. Inside her luxury sedan, Miranda sat for a moment, letting the engine warm up. The windows slowly fogged with the difference between the heated interior and the cold outside. She could still feel the music in her fingers, could still hear the harmonies they'd created together. For the first time in years, the melody didn't bring only pain there, was something else there too, something that felt almost like peace. The windshield wipers pushed away the gathering snow as she pulled away from the church, but she barely noticed the treacherous roads. In her mind, the nocturne played on, carrying her through the white winter afternoon. The grand ballroom of the newly restored Southside Community Arts Center hummed with anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the mixed crowd. Wealthy donors in evening wear sitting alongside neighborhood families in their Sunday best. The stage stretched wide, holding both the City Symphony Orchestra and Reverend Pearl's full church choir in their royal blue robes. Backstage, Eli Carter adjusted his bow tie, his weathered hands trembling slightly. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of the packed house. A young stagehand brought him a glass of water, which he sipped carefully to steady his nerves. Mr. Carter? Miranda appeared in the wing, resplendent in a deep purple evening gown. Are you ready? He turned to face her, taking in how different she looked from the tense CEO he'd first met months ago. Tonight, her smile reached her eyes. As ready as these old hands will allow, he said softly. The stage manager gave them their cue. Together, they walked out onto the gleaming hardwood stage. Two grand pianos faced each other, their polished surfaces reflecting the stage lights. Applause filled the room as they took their places. Eli caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. Aisha sat in the front row, phone ready to record. Reverend Pearl stood with the choir, beaming with pride. And there, scattered throughout the audience, were the faces of his neighbors, the people who'd supported his music through all these years. Miranda nodded slightly, and they began. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne, in E-flat major, floated out over the hushed audience. Their four hands moved in perfect synchronization, the melody passing between them like a shared secret. As they played, Eli noticed Miranda's shoulders relaxing, her body swaying gently with the music. The piece that had once been stiff with formality now flowed like water. When they reached the middle section, where the harmony grew more complex, he heard her breath catch. This had been Daniel's favorite part. Without breaking rhythm, Eli glanced at her. A single tear tracked down her cheek, but her fingers never faltered. The music swelled, filling every corner of the hall with its bittersweet beauty. As they approached the final measures of the nocturne, Eli felt something shift inside him. His arthritis-stiff fingers loosened, warmed by the music in the moment. Instead of ending the piece as written, he began to modulate the chords, transforming them into something new yet familiar. Miranda's eyes widened as she recognized the melody emerging from beneath his hands. Amazing Grace. The choir, led by Reverend Pearl, began to hum softly. One by one, voices joined in, rising from the audience as well. Eli's fingers danced across the keys, weaving the beloved hymn with threads of Chopin's harmony. Miranda watched him for a moment, then joined in, adding delicate counter-melodies that complemented his improvisation. The symphony strings swelled behind them, and the choir's voices soared. Throughout the hall, people began to stand, first a few, then dozens, then everyone. Some swayed, some raised their hands, some simply closed their eyes and listened. When the final chord faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the applause erupted like thunder. Roses and carnations showered the stage. In the front row, Aisha jumped up and down, tears streaming down her face as she filmed everything. Eli and Miranda stood and bowed together. He felt her hand squeeze his, warm and trembling slightly. The choir director was waving excitedly. Donation pledges were already pouring in through the event website, far exceeding their goal. They made their way backstage through a gauntlet of congratulations. In a quiet corner behind the curtain, Miranda turned to Eli, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That was," she started to say, but words failed her. "I felt him too," Eli said softly. "Music makes room for the ones we carry." Miranda reached up and touched his cheek. Neither of them was sure who moved first, but suddenly they were kissing, gentle, questioning at first, then deeper. Her fingers curled into his lapels as his hands cradled her face. Years of loneliness and guarded hearts melted away in that moment. When they finally pulled apart, Miranda whispered, "I felt Daniel here tonight. He would have loved this." Outside the stage door, snow had begun to fall. Aisha stood with her phone camera aimed at the crowd still pouring out of the hall, their excited voices carrying through the cold air. Snowflakes drifted lazily past her lens, catching the light from the newly lit marquee announcing Community Arts Center, Grand Reopening. The flakes settled on coat shoulders and upturned faces as people gathered in clusters, talking animatedly about what they'd just witnessed. Children spun with their arms outstretched, trying to catch snowflakes on their tongues. The night air buzzed with possibility and joy. Through her camera's viewfinder, Aisha captured it all, the diverse crowd mingling easily, the warmly lit windows of the restored building, and the gently falling snow that made everything look like a scene from a dream. The morning after the benefit concert dawned gray and cold. Eli made his way through the empty halls of Hale Tower, his footsteps echoing against marble floors still bearing traces of yesterday's celebrations. His shoulders ached pleasantly from the previous night's performance, a reminder of the music that had filled the community center. When he reached the basement employee locker room, he stopped short. The metal door of his locker was defaced with thick black spray paint. The word "Opportunist" stretched across it in angry, dripping letters. The paint was still tacky. This was fresh. Eli stood very still, his hand hovering over the combination lock. After 30 years of working in buildings like this, he'd learned to expect occasional disrespect, but this felt different, personal. The word itself carried weight, suggesting someone thought he was trying to climb above his station. "Oh my God, Mr. Carter!" Aisha rushed in, her eyes wide at the vandalism. "I'll get maintenance to clean this right away." "Leave it," Eli said quietly. "Some folks need to make their feelings known. Let them." He opened his locker and changed into his work uniform as if nothing was wrong, though his movements were more deliberate than usual. Aisha hovered nearby, phone in hand, scrolling with increasing agitation. "Have you seen the news this morning?" she asked hesitantly. Before Eli could answer, the break room TV flickered to life as the morning cleaning crew filed in. A news anchor's voice filled the room. In a developing story, questions are being raised about the viral Chopin Janitor phenomenon. New footage suggests the performance may have been more calculated than spontaneous. The screen cut to a heavily edited clip from the benefit concert. It showed only brief snippets of Eli speaking. The promise of marriage, followed by "must be honored," and finally, in front of all these witnesses, the words were spliced together, stripped of context, making it sound like he was demanding Miranda fulfill her casual promise. The break room fell silent. Eli watched his own face on the screen, distorted by the editing, barely recognizing himself in the man they were portraying. "That's not what you said at all," Aisha protested. "They cut out everything in between." A local talk radio segment played next, with the host's mocking voice. "Looks like our ambitious janitor thought he found his Cinderella story. But honey, this ain't no fairy tale. Know your place." Cruel laughter followed from the radio co-host. "What's next?" The gardener demanding the keys to the mansion because someone said, "I'd give anything for roses like these." Eli quietly gathered his cleaning supplies, his face a careful mask of dignity. Other employees avoided his eyes, suddenly very interested in their coffee cups or phones. By mid-morning, the story had spread through the building like wildfire. Whispers followed Eli as he worked. Some people who had warmly congratulated him yesterday now hurried past without acknowledgement. Around noon, Miranda found him cleaning windows in the East Wing corridor. Her heels clicked rapidly on the marble as she approached. "Eli, I've just seen the news. This is completely unacceptable. I'm having security investigate the locker incident, and our legal team is demanding retractions from the networks running that edited footage." "No need," Eli said, continuing to work the squeegee in smooth, practiced strokes. "Truth has its own time. At least let me send a car for you. People are being horrible online. I'm worried about your safety." Eli finally turned to face her. His expression was gentle but firm. "I appreciate the thought, Miranda, but I won't hide, and I won't be kept." "This isn't about keeping you," Miranda insisted. "It's about protecting you from this mess." "The mess will pass," Eli said. "But how I handle it, that matters. I've spent my life walking proud and straight, no matter what folks think they see when they look at me. I'm not about to change that now." Miranda's phone buzzed insistently. More messages, more fires to put out. She glanced at it with frustration. "You don't have to prove anything," she said softly. "No," Eli agreed. "I don't. That's exactly the point." He turned back to his work, effectively ending the conversation. Later that afternoon, Miranda sat alone in her office, blinds drawn against the winter sky. Her computer displayed the unedited footage from the benefit concert. In it, Eli's full statement was clear. The promise of marriage was made in jest, but the promise to restore this center must be honored. These children deserve to make music in front of all these witnesses. Her fists clenched as she watched the truth. Gabe Torres sat in the corner booth of Maxwell's coffee shop, his fingers drumming quietly on a worn leather folder. The small cafe, tucked away 3 blocks from Hale Tower, was where he did his most private business. Through the foggy window, he watched Miranda Hale's sleek black car pull up to the curb. Miranda entered, brushing snowflakes from her coat. Her face showed the strain of the past few days, but she managed a small smile when she spotted him. "Gabe, this is unusual for you." "Thanks for coming," he said, rising slightly as she slid into the booth. "I ordered your usual vanilla latte, extra shot." The waitress brought their drinks, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. They'd worked together for 15 years, long enough that words weren't always necessary. Gabe added a packet of sugar to his black coffee, stirring methodically. This isn't about the quarterly projections, is it? Miranda asked, studying his face. Gabe shook his head. No, though I wish it were. He glanced around the nearly empty cafe, then pulled the folder closer. I've been doing some digging in the archives about the Southside Community Arts Center closure. Miranda's shoulders tensed. That was almost 11 years ago. Why? Because something didn't add up. Gabe's voice was soft but firm. The timing of the plant closure, the way the Arts Center lost its funding so suddenly. I kept thinking about what you said about not remembering the details of the decision. He opened the folder carefully, sliding out a stack of documents. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the Hale Systems letterhead was still crisp. These are the original closure documents, including pages that were removed before they reached your desk. Miranda leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. The first page was familiar, the executive summary she'd signed as COO. But the pages that followed were new to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. Internal memo, dated 3 months before the closure. Gabe narrated quietly. Robert specifically directed the plant shutdown to boost the stock price before the third quarter earnings call. The Arts Center wasn't collateral damage. It was part of the calculation. Miranda's throat felt tight as she turned the page. There were photographs, children at piano lessons, elderly couples at community concerts, youth choir rehearsals, impact statements from teachers and families. And there, in one grainy image, was a younger Eli Carter standing beside a woman with a bright smile. The caption read, Lilla Carter, Piano Program Director. These were all removed, Gabe continued, before the final proposal reached the executive committee. You never saw them, Miranda. Your signature was based on incomplete information. Miranda pressed her hands flat against the table to stop their shaking. My father. He knew. Gabe nodded grimly. There's more. Robert had been tracking the center's activities for months. He saw it as a liability, too much community control, not enough corporate oversight. The plant closure was his way of bringing things back under Hale authority. Miranda stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee. I need air. Take the folder, Gabe said quietly. You need to know the whole truth. She grabbed the documents and hurried out, barely remembering to pull on her coat. The wind had picked up, driving bitter snowflakes against her face as she got into her car. Without thinking, she turned toward the south side of the city. 20 minutes later, she parked in front of the old Arts Center. The building loomed dark and silent, its windows still boarded up despite the recent fundraising success. Dead vines crawled up the brick walls like skeletal fingers. Miranda got out, clutching the folder to her chest. The wind whipped around her as she approached the entrance, staring at the heavy chains across the doors. She thought of Eli's hands on the piano keys, of Lila teaching children in these rooms, of all the music that had lived here, music that her signature had helped silence, even if she hadn't. The church's ancient radiator clanked and hissed, fighting against the February chill. Eli sat at the piano, his hands hovering over the keys as another wave of pain shot through his joints. He flexed his fingers slowly, trying to work through the stiffness, but each movement felt like glass grinding beneath his skin. Miranda noticed his hesitation from her spot beside him on the bench. Are you all right? Just need a minute. Eli's voice was tight. He reached into his coat pocket for the bottle of anti-inflammatory pills he always carried, but his fingers trembled so badly he couldn't grip the cap. Without a word, Miranda took the bottle, opened it, and shook 2 pills into his palm. The simple act of help made his throat tighten with emotion, both gratitude and shame. It's the weather, he explained, though they both knew it was more than that. Cold gets into these old bones. We can take a break, Miranda offered, but Eli shook his head. Been fighting this all week. Today's just. He pressed his hands flat against his thighs, trying to still their shaking. Some days are harder than others. The church was quiet, except for the radiator's complaints and the soft whisper of snow against the windows. Miranda watched as Eli struggled to straighten his fingers, each attempt causing him to wince. The showcase is in 3 days, he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. I can't guarantee I'll be able to play, not like people expect, not like you need. We can postpone. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. This isn't just about one bad day. My hands. He looked down at them. These betrayers that had once been so faithful. I can't commit to another big performance, not when so much is riding on it. As if on cue, Miranda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face draining of color as she read the message. What is it? Eli asked. The board. Her voice was hollow. My father has suspended me, pending review, the smear campaign, the marriage rumors. She set the phone down with trembling fingers. They're using it as an excuse. Eli closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. This is what I was afraid of. It's not your fault, isn't it? He turned to face her fully. Look at us, Miranda, a CEO and a janitor, trying to play at something that was never meant to be. The gossip, the headlines, the damage to your reputation. I should have known better. Don't say that. Miranda reached for his hand, but he pulled away gently. I have to, because this isn't just about music anymore. It's about your career, your company, and I won't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. I don't care about, but you should. His voice was gentle but firm. That company employs thousands. It does good work when guided right. You can't throw that away over this. The word hung between them, encompassing everything they'd built over these weeks of rehearsals, the music, the understanding, the tentative connection that had grown despite their differences. Miranda stood abruptly, pacing between the pews. So we just give up? Let them win? Sometimes stepping away is the bravest thing we can do. Eli slowly rose from the piano bench, his joints protesting. I think it's time we end this collaboration. Eli, please. You know I'm right. He gathered his coat, moving carefully to hide his discomfort. You need to focus on saving your position. And I need to. He glanced at his hands. I need to accept some truths about what I can and can't do anymore. Miranda stood frozen as he walked toward the church door. Snow was falling heavily now, coating the world in silence. Eli paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking back at her one last time. Thank you, he said softly, for reminding me what it felt like to dream again, even if just for a little while. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air. Miranda watched, rooted to the spot, as Eli's figure disappeared into the swirling snow. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty church. Through the frosted windows, she could just make out his silhouette growing fainter in the gathering storm. His usual straight-backed dignity was there, but his steps were slower, heavier, as if carrying the weight of all their shattered hopes into the darkness. Miranda stood alone in the church, surrounded by the ghosts of music they would never make together again. The radiator gave one final clank and fell silent, leaving her with nothing but the sound of snow against glass and the hollow space where possibility used to be. Miranda's heels clicked against the worn stone steps of Reverend Pearl's church, each step echoing in the empty street. The heavy wooden doors creaked as she slipped inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old hymnals wrapping around her like a forgotten blanket. Afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the empty pews. At the altar, Reverend Pearl worked methodically, her experienced hands bringing dull brass candlesticks back to life with gentle, circular motions. I thought I might find you here eventually, Pearl said without looking up, her voice carried easily in the quiet sanctuary. Miranda stood awkwardly in the center aisle, her designer coat suddenly feeling out of place among the humble surroundings. I'm not sure why I came. Oh, I think you do. Pearl set down her polishing cloth and turned to face Miranda. Her eyes were kind, but carried a penetrating wisdom that made Miranda want to look away. Sometimes we need to be somewhere honest when everything else feels false. Miranda's throat tightened. She sank into the nearest pew, her perfectly maintained composure beginning to crack. Everything's falling apart. Is it falling apart? Pearl asked, settling beside her. Or is it finally coming together in truth? I don't understand. Child, you've spent your whole life building walls with pretty pictures painted on them. PR statements, perfect poses. What did you call it? Optics? Pearl's voice was gentle but firm. You've worshipped a golden calf called image for so long, you've forgotten what it means to stand in simple truth. The words hit Miranda like physical blows. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. I was trying to protect the company, my father's legacy, my position, and what has all that protection cost you? Cost others? Pearl reached over and took Miranda's manicured hand in her work, worn one. You found something real with Eli. Something that made your heart beat again after Daniel. But instead of embracing that truth, you let it become another performance. Miranda's chest heaved as the tears finally spilled over. I didn't mean to. I don't know how to be any other way anymore. Then perhaps it's time to learn. Pearl stood and walked to the altar, her sensible shoes quiet on the carpet runner. There's no PR team here. No cameras. No shareholders. Just you and God and whatever truth you need to speak. Miranda stared at the simple wooden cross hanging above the altar. Her voice came out as a whisper. I'm so tired of pretending. She slid from the pew onto her knees, decades of careful control crumbling like sand. I'm sorry, she prayed, her words echoing in the empty sanctuary. I'm sorry for the harm I've caused, for signing papers without asking questions, for caring more about appearances than people, for being afraid to love again after Daniel. Her voice broke. Please, show me how to make this right. Pearl watched silently, her eyes bright with compassion. Across town, in the basement break room of Hale Tower, Aisha Brooks spread a collection of letters across the table where Eli sat nursing a cup of coffee. These came to the building addressed to you, she said, pushing an envelope toward him. They're from people who were at the concert, mostly seniors from the neighborhood. Eli picked up the first letter, his tired eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. Dear Mr. Carter, I haven't been to a concert since my Herald passed 15 years ago. That night, hearing you play, I felt young again, felt hope again. Please don't let them stop the music. We need it more than they know. Ruth Martinez, age 82. Another read. When you played Amazing Grace, I saw my granddaughter cry for the first time since her mother died. Thank you for giving her permission to feel again. James Wilson. Letter after letter spoke of awakening, of healing, of community pride restored. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he read each one. You see? Aisha leaned forward, her eyes intense. This isn't about some PR stunt or marriage dare anymore. These people felt seen, heard, like they mattered. I know. Eli's voice was rough with emotion. Then why are you walking away? He was silent for a long moment, staring at Ruth Martinez's careful script. I thought I was protecting Miranda, protecting myself, but maybe. He trailed off, lost in thought. Later that evening, Eli sat at his small kitchen table, a single lamp casting warm light over the scattered letters. He picked up Ruth's note again, reading it for perhaps the dozenth time. A tear slipped down his weathered cheek, landing silently on the paper. In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by these testament of lives touched and hearts moved, the weight of what he'd almost surrendered settled heavily on his shoulders. Miranda stood at her penthouse window, steam rising from an untouched coffee cup in her hands. The sky was still dark, but hints of dawn touched the horizon. Below, early commuters dotted the sidewalks like tiny chess pieces, their breath visible in the February chill. Her phone sat heavy in her pocket, Robert's latest message still unanswered. The lawyers have prepared your statement. Be at the tower by 9. She pulled it out, scrolling past her father's text to find Gabe's number. He answered on the first ring. Miranda? It's 5:30 in the morning. I know what I'm going to do, she said, watching a delivery truck navigate the empty streets below. At the shareholder meeting, I'm not reading their statement. A pause. You're going to tell them everything? The memo, the arts center, all of it. Her voice was steady now, unlike the trembling whisper she'd left in the church yesterday. I signed those papers without checking. That's on me, and I'm done hiding behind PR spin. Robert will fight back hard, Gabe warned. He's got the board eating out of his hand. Miranda took a sip of coffee, grimacing at its coldness. Let him. I'm not that scared little girl anymore, trying to prove herself to Daddy. She set the cup down with a quiet clink. I've spent my whole career worried about optics, about what people might think. Meanwhile, real people Eli's community, those kids without their music classes, they paid the price for our strategic decisions. Speaking of Eli, Gabe's voice softened. Have you talked to him? No. Miranda pressed her forehead against the cool glass. But I'm hoping he'll understand. Even if, she swallowed hard, even if it means losing everything else. Across town, in a modest apartment filled with morning shadows, Eli Carter sat at his small kitchen table. His hands, stiff from the cold, were wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Scattered across the table were dozens of letters, handwritten notes from seniors who'd attended the benefit concert, crayon drawings from neighborhood kids who'd heard him play at church. One letter in particular caught his eye again. In shaky handwriting, Mrs. Washington from the senior center had written, "When you played that night, I remembered what hope feels like. Don't let them take our music away again." Eli flexed his fingers slowly, feeling the familiar ache. The arthritis wasn't better, wouldn't be better. But something had shifted in his mind. He thought of Lila, how she'd taught piano right up until the center closed, even when her own illness was wearing her down. Can't let fear win twice, he murmured to the empty room. His phone lit up with Aisha's morning text. You coming to the shareholder meeting? People are gathering outside already. Eli's chest tightened at the thought of those marble halls, the judgment, the cameras. But Mrs. Washington's words echoed in his mind. Don't let them take our music away again. His fingers moved to the phone's keypad. Yes, tell Reverend Pearl to bring the choir. Back in her apartment, Miranda changed into a simple black dress-no power suit today. She pulled her mother's old pearl necklace from its velvet box, remembering how Mom had always said, pearls remind us to be real, not perfect. The sky was lightening now, painting the city in shades of purple and gold. Miranda gathered her coat and car keys, leaving her prepared statement untouched on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, she felt truly awake. Across town, Eli put on his Sunday suit, the one he usually saved for church. His hands protested as he tied his tie, but he took his time, making each movement deliberate. On his way out, he paused at the upright piano in his living room, gently touching its worn keys. One more time, he whispered, and though his fingers ached, they remembered every note of the nocturne. The morning sun broke over Chicago's skyline, painting the Hale Tower in brilliant light. Cars honked in the growing traffic, and a cold wind whipped between the buildings. But the sky was a perfect, clear blue, the kind of day that made everything look new and possible. Miranda's town car pulled away from her building, merging into the stream of morning traffic. In her lap, she held the folder Gabe had given her, containing the truth she should have seen years ago. At the same moment, Eli stepped onto a bus, nodding to the driver he'd known for years. Other passengers smiled in recognition, the Chopin janitor, the one who'd made their neighborhood proud. The city moved around them both, waking up to what promised to be a day unlike any other. The Hale Tower rose ahead, its glass surfaces catching the morning light like a beacon, calling them both toward whatever waited inside. The Hale Tower lobby buzzed with tension. Reporters huddled near the entrance, their cameras trained on the brass elevator doors. Inside the roped-off waiting area, shareholders in tailored suits checked their watches and whispered among themselves. Robert Hale stood near the baby grand piano, which had been polished to a mirror shine for the occasion. His face was carefully composed, but his fingers drummed against his leather portfolio. The prepared statement sat inside, each word vetted by a team of lawyers. At precisely 9 o'clock, the elevator chimed. Miranda stepped out, but instead of heading to the podium, she walked straight to the building's front doors. The security guard's eyes widened as she gestured for him to open them. "Ms. Hale," Robert called sharply. "The meeting is about to begin." "Yes, it is," Miranda said. Her voice carried across the marble floor. "But first, we need all our stakeholders present." Through the doors came Reverend Pearl, followed by a stream of people from the neighborhood, seniors who had attended the benefit concert, parents with young children, and behind them, Eli's church choir in their royal blue robes. Last came Eli himself, looking tired but determined in a pressed black suit. Camera flashes exploded. Robert stepped forward, face darkening. "This is a closed shareholder meeting. You can't—" "Actually, Father, I can." Miranda's heels clicked as she crossed to the podium. "As CEO, I have the authority to invite community representatives to any corporate event. And these people have more stake in Hale Systems' decisions than anyone in this room." She nodded to Eli, who sat at the piano. The choir arranged themselves behind him, faces solemn and dignified. A few shareholders shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned forward with interest. "Before we begin the formal meeting," Miranda said, "I want to share something that should have been made public 10 years ago." She opened a folder, not the one containing the lawyer's statement, but a worn manila envelope Gabe had given her. Robert moved toward her, but Gabe smoothly intercepted him. Two other board members that Gabe had quietly approached yesterday stepped up as well, forming a subtle barrier. Miranda's voice was clear and steady as she began to read. "Impact Assessment. Southside Community Arts Center, 2013. The proposed facility closure will affect approximately 500 students enrolled in music and arts programs." She continued through the statistics, the photographs, the teacher testimonials, including one from Eli's late wife Lila. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't stop. When she finished, the lobby was silent except for a child's whispered question to their parent. Miranda looked up, meeting the cameras directly. "I signed the order to close that facility as Chief Operating Officer," she said. "I was told the impact report showed minimal community effect. That was a lie. This memo was deliberately withheld, and I failed to verify the facts independently. People lost their jobs. Children lost opportunities. A vital community space was destroyed, all to boost our stock price by 3 points." Murmurs rippled through the shareholders. Robert's face had gone from red to white. "As CEO, I could offer corporate apologies and PR initiatives," Miranda continued. "Instead, I'm offering my resignation." The murmurs exploded into exclamations. Cameras clicked rapidly. "I will be stepping down as CEO to chair an independent foundation that will fully fund and reopen the Arts Center with community oversight. The foundation will be seeded with my personal shares in Hale Systems, valued at approximately $30 million. She paused, then added quietly, "It's time for actions to speak louder than words." Gabe stepped to the microphone. "As CFO, I move to accept Ms. Hale's resignation and foundation proposal. I further move to accept Robert Hale's retirement, effective immediately, and to appoint Sandra Chen as interim CEO, pending board approval." "I second," called another board member. "This is outrageous," Robert sputtered, but his voice was drowned out as Eli's fingers touched the keys, beginning the familiar notes of Chopin's Nocturne. The melody rose, sweet and clear in the marble space. As he played, the choir began to hum softly beneath the classical lines. Then, as the final measures approached, Eli smoothly transitioned the nocturne's gentle end into the powerful chords of a gospel song. The choir's voices swelled, rich and joyful, filling the corporate lobby with unexpected soul. Shareholders found themselves swaying slightly. A security guard wiped his eyes. Even some reporters set down their cameras to simply listen. The music built to a triumphant crescendo, and when the final chord faded, the applause that erupted was immediate and thunderous, drowning out Robert's protests and washing away the last echoes of corporate decorum. Spring sunshine streamed through the freshly washed windows of the Southside Community Arts Center. The scent of paint and wood polish mingled with the sounds of hammering and children's laughter echoing through the halls. Yellow wet paint signs dotted the corridors, where volunteers in splattered overalls carefully touched up the walls in warm cream and soft blue. In what used to be the main performance hall, a group of seniors sat at electronic keyboards, their faces a mix of concentration and delight. Miranda stood at the front, her corporate suits replaced by comfortable slacks and a flowing blouse. "That's it, Mrs. Washington," she encouraged, watching an elderly woman carefully place her fingers on the keys. "Remember, thumb on middle C, just like we practiced." The woman's face lit up as she found the right position. "Like this? Perfect." Miranda moved between the keyboards, adjusting hand positions with gentle touches. "Now, let's try that C major scale again. Nice and slow." A chorus of somewhat uneven notes filled the room as 8 pairs of hands moved cautiously up and down the keys. Miranda caught sight of herself in the wall mirror. She was smiling, really smiling, the kind that reached her eyes. Teaching beginners would have seemed beneath her just months ago. Now it felt like exactly where she belonged. Down the hall, rhythmic clapping and teenage laughter spilled from another classroom. Eli sat in a circle with 6 high school students, each at their own keyboard. His arthritis-curved fingers tapped out a syncopated beat on his knees. "Feel that?" he asked, nodding as the students clapped along. "That's the heart of jazz right there. Before we touch a single key, we gotta get that rhythm in our bones." A gangly boy with glasses raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, when do we get to play the fancy stuff, like that Chopin piece you did at the concert?" Eli chuckled. "One step at a time, Marcus. Chopin wrote some beautiful music, but he started with scales just like everybody else." He flexed his hands, hiding a small wince. "Trust me, strong foundations matter more than fancy flourishes." The renovation sounds created an irregular percussion track behind their rhythm exercise, the whir of electric drills, the tap of hammers, the scrape of furniture being moved. Through the windows, they could see Aisha directing a team of volunteers as they planted flowers in the newly cleared garden beds. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and laughter. Around noon, Miranda poked her head into Eli's classroom, just as his students were packing up. "Lunch break?" Eli nodded, gathering his sheet music. They made their way through the bustling hallways, stopping occasionally to chat with volunteers or answer questions. A little girl ran past with paintbrushes in her hands, and Miranda had to step quickly to avoid getting paint on her shoes. The front steps of the center were sun-warmed and peaceful. Miranda and Eli sat side by side, sharing a simple lunch of sandwiches and fruit. Below them, the neighborhood hummed with life. Cars passing, people walking dogs, kids playing in nearby yards. The spring breeze carried the scent of newly cut grass and blooming trees. "The seniors are coming along nicely," Miranda said, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the sidewalk. Mrs. Washington finally found middle C without having to count keys. "That's wonderful." Eli's eyes crinkled with genuine pleasure. "How does it feel, being on the teaching side?" Miranda was quiet for a moment, considering. "Healing," she finally said. "Every time I help someone find the right notes, it's like I'm giving back something that was lost. Not just to them, but to myself, too." Eli nodded, understanding in his eyes. They sat in comfortable silence, eating their lunch and watching the neighborhood life unfold before them. The sun was warm on their faces, and the sounds of construction and practice from inside the building created a symphony of renewal. A group of Eli's teenage students walked by, waving as they headed to the corner store for lunch. One of them was already humming the rhythm pattern they'd learned that morning. Miranda and Eli waved back, sharing a look of quiet satisfaction. The front door opened behind them, and Reverend Pearl stepped out, carrying a clipboard. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said with a knowing smile. "Just wanted to confirm the schedule for next week's community showcase." "Pull up a step," Eli offered, sliding over to make room. The 3 of them sat together in the spring sunshine, planning the future of the center that was quickly becoming the heart of the neighborhood once again. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the recital hall, casting long golden rectangles across the newly polished hardwood floor. The space had been transformed from its previously neglected state. Gone were the water stains and peeling paint, replaced by fresh cream-colored walls and restored crown molding. The wooden seats, arranged in neat rows, gleamed with fresh varnish. Miranda's footsteps echoed in the empty hall as she made her way toward the stage, a folder of sheet music tucked under her arm. The centerpiece of the room, a restored Steinway grand piano, caught the sunlight on its polished ebony surface. Eli sat at the bench, running through warm-up exercises, his fingers moving with practiced ease despite the arthritis that sometimes troubled him. He looked up as she approached, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I thought you'd be done with the beginner class by now." "Mrs. Washington wanted to practice a few more times," Miranda replied, setting the folder down on the piano. "She's determined to play Happy Birthday for her granddaughter next week." Eli nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. Music's sweeter when it's for someone you love." Miranda's fingers trailed along the piano's curved edge as she walked around it. The past few months had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The sharp edges of her corporate persona had softened, replaced by something more genuine. Here, in this hall, with this man, she felt more herself than she had in years. Making a sudden decision, Miranda moved to stand in front of Eli. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she slowly lowered herself to one knee. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice warm with affection and humor, "play Chopin and I'll marry you this time for real. No cameras, no publicity, just us." Eli's rich laugh filled the space. "Now, where have I heard that before?" His eyes held hers, filled with tenderness and understanding of how far they'd both come from that first night in the Hale Tower lobby. Without another word, he turned to the keys and began the opening notes of the nocturne in E-flat major. The familiar melody floated through the air, but this time it wasn't a performance or a rehearsal. It was a conversation, a prayer, a promise. Halfway through the piece, Eli's hands stilled. He shifted on the bench, making room beside him, and gestured for Miranda to join him. "Your turn," he said softly. Miranda settled beside him, their shoulders touching. The warmth of his presence steadied her as she placed her hands on the keys. Together, they completed the piece, their fingers dancing across the keyboard in perfect harmony. The final notes hung in the air like suspended starlight. A sound of quiet laughter drifted from the doorway. They turned to find Aisha and Reverend Pearl watching, along with several of Miranda's piano students and some of the neighborhood kids who'd been helping with the renovation. The onlookers' faces were bright with shared joy at witnessing this tender moment. The gentle echo of the last chord faded into the warm spring afternoon, replaced by soft laughter and the quiet murmur of happy voices filling the hall. The community center hummed with activity as volunteers streamed in and out of the courtyard, their arms full of flowers and decorations. Aisha stood in the center of the organized chaos, clipboard in hand, directing traffic like a seasoned orchestra conductor. "Those white roses go along the aisle," she called out to a group of teenagers. "And be careful with those glass vases. They're borrowed from the church." Her enthusiasm was infectious, making even the most mundane tasks feel like part of something special. The courtyard had transformed from a forgotten space into a garden sanctuary. Fresh mulch lined the newly planted flower beds, and climbing vines had been carefully trained up the restored brick walls. String lights crisscrossed overhead, waiting to twinkle against the evening sky. "Miss Brooks," a young girl tugged at Aisha's sleeve. "We finished making all the paper flowers for the centerpieces." Aisha knelt down to examine their handiwork. "These are beautiful, Jasmine. You've got quite the artistic touch." The paper flowers, crafted by the children in the center's art program, would be mixed with real blooms, a touch that perfectly represented how the community had come together. Inside the music room, a group of children gathered around an upright piano, their faces screwed up in concentration as they practiced Canon in D. Their small fingers moved carefully over the keys, the melody occasionally stumbling, but always picking back up. Mrs. Washington, a retired music teacher who had volunteered to help, tapped out the rhythm with her foot. "Remember," she encouraged, "this is a very special song for Mr. Carter and Miss Hale. We want to make it perfect." Reverend Pearl's voice carried from the courtyard, where she was running through the ceremony details with another group. "And then the choir will stand. Yes, right there by the fountain." The acoustics are lovely in this corner. The rehearsal flowed with the natural rhythm of people who knew each other well. Every few minutes, someone would pop their head in with a question or suggestion, and decisions were made with the easy back and forth of family. In a quiet corner of the building, Miranda stood in front of a full-length mirror, running her hands over the simple silk dress she'd chosen. No beads, no lace, just clean lines and elegant simplicity. She dismissed the idea of shopping at expensive boutiques, instead finding the perfect dress at a small local shop owned by one of their senior piano students' daughters. "You look beautiful," said Mrs. Chen, making minor adjustments to the hem. The elderly seamstress had insisted on doing the alterations herself, refusing payment. Like morning light on still water. Down the hall, in the men's changing room, Eli adjusted his navy suit jacket, examining his reflection. The suit was new. His Sunday best wouldn't do for this occasion, the ladies had insisted, but he'd kept his father's gold tie pin, polished to a warm glow. His grandson Marcus, visiting from Detroit, helped straighten his tie. "Looking sharp, Grandpa," Marcus grinned. "Though I still think you should have gone with the bow tie." "Some traditions don't need changing," Eli replied with a warm chuckle. Back in the courtyard, Aisha directed the placement of chairs, simple white wooden ones for the ceremony, with cushions handmade by the center's sewing circle. Each row was carefully measured and aligned, creating an aisle that led to an arch woven with greenery and white flowers. The children's choir gathered for one more practice run, their young voices lifting in harmony. They'd insisted on adding a gospel song after the traditional wedding march, a suggestion that had brought tears to Eli's eyes when they'd first performed it for him. As the afternoon wore on, the setting sun began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the courtyard's brick pavers. Volunteers paused in their work to admire the effect as the string lights were tested, adding a soft twinkle to the growing dusk. "It's perfect," Reverend Pearl murmured, standing at the back of the courtyard. "Just perfect." She watched as the last chairs were positioned, each one representing a member of this beautiful, patchwork family that had grown around the center, around Eli and Miranda's unexpected love story. The weather forecast promised clear skies for tomorrow, not that anyone was worried. As Reverend Pearl had said during planning, the Lord already brought these two together through a winter storm. He's not about to let a little weather interrupt their spring wedding. Workers from the local florist arrived with the final deliveries. More white roses, hydrangeas, and greenery to decorate the arch. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the early evening air, and somewhere in the garden, a bird sang its evening song. A group of volunteers set up the reception tables in neat rows, each one topped with crisp white linens. The paper flowers made by the children were arranged in vintage mason jars, collected by the community over the past weeks. Each centerpiece told a story, just like every person who would fill these seats tomorrow. The sunset's golden light washed over the scene, turning everything it touched to honey. Aisha stood back, checking items off her list one by one, satisfaction evident in her smile. The chairs formed perfect rows, leading to where Eli and Miranda would stand tomorrow, ready to begin their new chapter together. "I think," she said to no one in particular, "we're ready." The courtyard settled into a peaceful hush as the day's work drew to a close. The space waited, perfectly prepared, for tomorrow's celebration, a testament to the power of community, of love, and of second chances. Morning sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of Reverend Pearl's church, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. The old building had never looked more alive, with white roses and soft blue ribbons adorning every corner. The familiar scent of lemon polish mixed with fresh flowers filled the air. Neighbors filed in wearing their Sunday best, their faces bright with anticipation. Mrs. Johnson from the senior piano class shuffled to her seat, dabbing her eyes already with a lace handkerchief. A group of teenagers from Eli's music program, dressed in pressed shirts and neat dresses, whispered excitedly as they took their places in the choir stands. In the front row, Gabe Torres sat with several board members who had supported the changes at Hale Systems. They looked slightly out of place in their expensive suits, but their smiles were genuine as they chatted with the local residents around them. Aisha darted back and forth in a flowing blue dress, making last-minute adjustments to flowers and straightening programs. She paused to help old Mr. Washington, who had trouble with his walker, find a seat near the front. Inside the small room off the sanctuary, Miranda stood before a mirror, smoothing her cream-colored dress. She had chosen something simple and elegant, no beads or lace, just clean lines that made her feel both comfortable and beautiful. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a small pearl necklace that had belonged to Daniel's grandmother. "You look perfect," Reverend Pearl's wife said softly, helping Miranda pin a white rose to her dress. "How are you feeling?" Miranda took a deep breath. "Peaceful," she answered, surprising herself with how true it felt. For the first time in years, completely peaceful. Down the hall, in his office, Eli sat at his old upright piano, warming up his hands with gentle scales. He wore a navy suit that fit him perfectly, a white rose matching Miranda's pin to his lapel. The arthritis in his fingers had eased with the warmer spring weather, but he still moved them carefully, reverently. "Ready, Mr. Carter?" Aisha poked her head in, grinning. "Everyone's seated." Eli stood, straightening his tie. "As ready as I've ever been," he said, his deep voice warm with joy. The choir began to hum softly as Eli made his way to the front of the church. He took his place at the grand piano, nodding to the choir director. The familiar opening notes of Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, filled the sanctuary, but with a gentle gospel swing that made it uniquely their own. The congregation turned as Miranda appeared in the doorway. She carried no bouquet, her hands would be needed for what was to come. Instead, a single white rose was tucked into her silver-streaked hair, which fell in soft waves around her shoulders. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes met Eli's. The music swelled, the choir's voices rising in perfect harmony. Miranda's steps matched the rhythm of the song, each one bringing her closer to the man who had helped her rediscover not just music but herself. Reverend Pearl stood waiting, his kind face beaming as Miranda reached the front. But instead of taking her place beside Eli, she sat next to him at the piano. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the church as they began to play together, the Chopin nocturne that had started everything. Their hands moved in perfect synchronization across the keys, the melody weaving through the sanctuary like a prayer. When the final notes faded, they turned to face each other as Reverend Pearl began the ceremony. "We gather today," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church, "to celebrate not just the union of two hearts, but the healing power of music, faith, and community." The vows they exchanged were simple but profound. Eli spoke of second chances and the courage to begin again. Miranda promised to always make room for grace notes in life's symphony. Their words echoed off the old church walls, mingling with happy sniffles from the congregation. "The rings," Reverend Pearl called, and Aisha stepped forward, presenting two simple gold bands on a small velvet cushion. As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, the choir began to sing softly. "Amazing Grace," arranged in the style that had moved so many hearts at their first concert together. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Pearl declared, his voice thick with emotion, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was gentle and sure, a promise sealed with decades of lived experience and newfound joy. The church erupted in cheers and applause as the choir burst into full song, their voices soaring to the rafters with jubilant hallelujahs. The celebration spilled from the church into the community center's courtyard like a joyful river. Checkered tablecloths fluttered in the warm spring breeze, laden with dishes that told the story of the neighborhood. Miss Rosa's tamales nestled next to Reverend Pearl's famous sweet potato pie, and Mrs. Chen's dumplings shared space with Aisha's mother's fragrant biryani. The brick walls of the courtyard, freshly cleaned and adorned with climbing ivy, embraced the gathering like old friends. Children darted between the tables, their fancy clothes already showing signs of play, while teens huddled near the makeshift dance floor, phones ready to capture every moment. Eli sat at the restored upright piano that had been carefully wheeled outside for the occasion. His fingers, loosened by joy rather than stiffened by pain, danced across the keys in a playful ragtime melody that made feet tap and heads bob. His navy suit jacket was draped over the piano bench, his crisp white sleeves rolled up as he played, wedding band catching the afternoon light. "Come on, Mrs. Carter," Aisha called out to Miranda, who stood chatting with some of her senior piano students. "You can't let all this good music go to waste." Miranda laughed, a free, unguarded sound that would have been unimaginable just months ago. Her simple, cream-colored dress swished as Aisha pulled her onto the dance floor. The young woman led the bride in an impromptu twirl, both of them giggling like schoolgirls. "I never thought I'd see the day," Mrs. Washington remarked to her neighbor, watching Miranda dance with genuine abandon. "That woman used to walk through the lobby like she was made of marble." "Love'll do that to you," her friend replied, helping herself to another piece of cornbread. "Melt the marble right off." The absence of Robert Hale hung in the air like a faint shadow, but it couldn't dim the warmth of the gathering. If anything, the community seemed to draw closer, filling any empty spaces with extra helpings of love and acceptance. Gabe Torres, who had helped expose Robert's deception, raised his glass in a quiet toast to the couple from his spot near the lemonade fountain. Eli transitioned smoothly into the entertainer, his interpretation infused with gospel undertones that made the classic piece entirely his own. Miranda caught his eye across the courtyard and smiled, her face glowing with a happiness that reached all the way to her eyes. She'd abandoned her designer heels hours ago, dancing barefoot on the smooth stones of the courtyard. A group of Eli's choir members gathered around the piano, adding impromptu harmonies to his playing. Their voices lifted into the afternoon air, drawing more dancers to the floor. Even some of the older folks who'd been content to watch now found themselves swaying to the infectious rhythm. "This is what healing looks like," Reverend Pearl observed to no one in particular, watching elderly Mrs. Peterson teach a group of giggling children the Charleston. "This is what community means." Tables were pushed back to make more room for dancing as the afternoon wore on. The food kept coming, covered dishes appearing as if by magic whenever a platter ran low. Church ladies bustled about with fresh lemonade and sweet tea, making sure no one went thirsty in the warm spring air. Aisha's social media live stream captured it all. The impromptu Soul Train line that formed when Eli switched to Stevie Wonder. The moment when Miranda's beginning piano students presented her with a handmade card big enough to need 3 kids to hold it. The way Eli's hands never seemed to tire as he played song after song, joy flowing from his fingers like a blessing. As the afternoon light began to soften into evening, someone plugged in the strings of lights that had been strung between the old oak trees. They flickered to life one strand at a time, creating a canopy of star-like twinkles above the celebration. The effect transformed the courtyard into something magical, not the cold glamour of corporate galas, but the warm enchantment of genuine happiness shared. The music showed no signs of stopping. When Eli finally stood from the piano, stretching his back with a satisfied smile, 3 of his students took turns at the keys, keeping the rhythm of joy flowing. The songs shifted and changed like the patterns of the dancing lights above, sometimes ragtime, sometimes gospel, sometimes soul, but always infused with the spirit of celebration. Miranda found her way back to her husband's side, slipping her hand into his as they watched their 2 worlds dance together under the growing dusk. The evening air carried the mingled scents of coffee being served with dessert, night-blooming jasmine from the garden, and the lingering warmth of a perfect spring day. The courtyard glowed with more than just the strings of lights. It shone with the light of community restored, of barriers broken down, of music doing what it had always done best, bringing people together in harmony. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the recital hall, painting golden stripes across the newly polished hardwood floor. The space still held the lingering warmth of yesterday's wedding celebration, but now a different kind of anticipation filled the air. About 30 people gathered in small clusters. Board members in business attire stood alongside neighborhood families in their Sunday best, while children fidgeted in plastic chairs set up in neat rows. Miranda stood near the covered plaque, smoothing her simple blue dress with trembling hands. She'd changed from yesterday's wedding gown into something more subdued, but her face still glowed with newfound happiness. Next to her, Eli wore a charcoal sweater and pressed slacks, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. Aisha bustled around with a clipboard, directing last-minute adjustments to the flower arrangements that flanked the plaque. The brass plate remained hidden beneath a velvet cloth, though its shape hinted at the words waiting to be revealed. Reverend Pearl stepped forward, and the murmur of conversation settled into respectful silence. "We gather today," she began, her rich voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "to honor two souls who never met in this life, but whose legacies have brought us all together." Miranda's fingers found Eli's, squeezing tight. He drew in a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the covered plaque. "Daniel Hale," Reverend Pearl continued, "was a young man who found his voice through music, whose spirit touched everyone who knew him." She turned slightly. "And Lila Carter was a teacher who believed every child deserved the chance to discover their own song." In the front row, Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She'd been one of Lila's closest friends, had watched her teach countless students in this very room before the center closed. "Neither of them lived to see this day," the Reverend said, "but their love, through their families, has helped restore these walls, these halls, this sacred space of learning and joy." Eli stepped forward, his voice soft but steady. "Lila used to say that music was God's way of teaching us to listen to each other." He smiled at the gathered faces. She believed everyone had music inside them, waiting to be heard. Miranda moved to stand beside him. "Daniel was the same way," she said, her voice catching slightly. "He never walked past a piano without playing something, even if it was just chopsticks. He believed music could make any day better." Together, they reached for the velvet cloth. The fabric whispered as it fell away, revealing the gleaming brass plaque. "Dedicated to Daniel Hale, Lila Carter, because love is louder." The words caught the sunlight, sending warm reflections dancing across the walls. For a moment, perfect silence held the room in its embrace. Then applause erupted, starting soft and building to fill the space with its thunder. Mrs. Chen was openly crying now, and even some of the board members were discreetly wiping their eyes. Miranda turned to Eli, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her, steady and sure, as they stood before the physical reminder of the loved ones who had brought them to this moment. The applause gradually faded, but before anyone could move to make speeches or take photos, a small figure darted from the crowd. It was Tommy, one of the neighborhood kids, maybe 7 years old. He made a beeline for the grand piano that dominated the corner of the room. With the fearless curiosity of childhood, he reached up and pressed one key, then another. The notes rang out clear and true in the quiet hall. Other children, sensing permission in the adults' indulgent smiles, began to drift toward the piano. Soon, small fingers were exploring the keys, creating a jumble of experimental sounds that somehow didn't clash but instead filled the room with possibility. Eli and Miranda stayed by the plaque, watching as the next generation discovered the magic of music for themselves. Their hands remained clasped, wedding rings, catching the light, just like the plaque that would now watch over every lesson, every practice session, every moment of discovery in this restored space. The children's improvised melody continued, sometimes stumbling, sometimes surprisingly sweet, but always reaching forward into the future that Daniel and Lila had helped make possible. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the community center, casting long shadows across freshly painted walls. The building hummed with life and music, a stark contrast to its boarded-up silence just months ago. Down the main hallway, a chorus of simple scales drifted from the beginner's classroom, where Miranda sat at an upright piano, surrounded by 6 eager seniors. "Remember to curve those fingers," Miranda said gently, demonstrating the proper form. "Like you're holding a small orange." Her own hands moved slowly across the keys, showing the deliberate movement. "Mrs. Chen, that's perfect. See how much clearer the notes sound?" The elderly woman beamed, her careful practice paying off in crisp, even notes. Miranda caught herself smiling. Teaching had become the highlight of her week, so different from tense board meetings and PR crises. Here, success was measured in small victories, a properly curved finger, a steady rhythm finally mastered. From the recital hall next door came the sound of more advanced music, Eli working with his teen ensemble. The complex harmonies of a jazz arrangement filtered through the wall. Miranda paused her lesson to let everyone listen for a moment. The teenagers had raw talent that Eli was carefully nurturing into real skill. "Okay, everyone, let's try that C major scale one more time, hands together," Miranda encouraged, turning back to her students. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. When the beginner's session ended, Miranda walked her students to the door, exchanging warm goodbyes. Mrs. Chen lingered to show Miranda photos of her grandchildren on her phone. "My grandson Tommy wants to start lessons next semester," she said proudly. "He saw the video of our spring recital." Down the hall, Eli's advanced class was also wrapping up. The teens packed up their instruments, chattering excitedly about next week's piece. Aisha moved among them with her phone camera, capturing candid moments for the center's social media accounts. "Mr. Carter, can you show us that blues riff one more time?" called Marcus, a lanky 16-year-old who had barely touched a piano 6 months ago. Now he stayed late after every class, soaking up everything Eli could teach. Eli settled back at the piano, his hands moving effortlessly through a rolling blues progression. The remaining students gathered around, phones recording. Even after a full day of teaching, music energized him in a way nothing else could. "The trick is in the rhythm," he explained, slowing down to show the syncopation. "Feel how it pushes and pulls. Music's got to breathe." Miranda appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame to watch. Her heart swelled seeing Eli in his element, passing on not just technique, but the soul of music itself. The teens noticed her and waved. She was a familiar presence now, no longer the intimidating CEO, but simply Ms. M., another teacher who loved music. Aisha panned her camera around the room, capturing the easy interaction between students and teachers. "This is going straight to our Instagram," she declared. The donors love seeing the real impact of their support. Indeed, the center's social media accounts had exploded with followers. Videos of lessons, rehearsals, and impromptu performances regularly drew thousands of views. More importantly, they showed the center doing exactly what it promised, bringing music and opportunity to everyone who wanted to learn. As the last students filtered out, Aisha showed Miranda and Eli her latest post, a split screen of beginner and advanced classes, both equally engaged in making music. The comments were already flowing in with heart emojis and supportive messages. "We're trending again," Aisha grinned, scrolling through responses. "People love seeing how the center's grown. Remember when this place was all dusty and dark?" Miranda and Eli exchanged a knowing look. Those days felt like another lifetime now. The center had become exactly what they'd hoped, a place where music broke down barriers and built bridges instead. They began their end-of-day routine, straightening chairs and organizing sheet music. In the beginner's room, Miranda found a forgotten scarf and tucked it away in the lost and found box. Eli checked the pianos, making sure they were covered and protected for the night. Through the windows, they could see the sky deepening to purple, streetlights beginning to flicker on. A few last notes echoed from somewhere in the building, probably Marcus, sneaking in a final practice before heading home. Aisha gathered her things, giving them both quick hugs before heading out. "Don't forget we have the community choir starting tomorrow," she called over her shoulder. "I already have a waiting list for sign-ups." Miranda and Eli made their final rounds, turning off lights and checking doors. The building settled into evening quiet, but it was a peaceful silence now, full of the day's lingering music and the promise of tomorrow's songs. At the main entrance, Eli punched in the security code while Miranda pulled on her light jacket. The spring evening was mild, perfect for their walk home. They stepped out onto the sidewalk together, Eli locking the heavy doors behind them. Without needing to discuss it, they joined hands as they started down the familiar route. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The streetlights cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. The spring evening wrapped the community center in gentle warmth, a welcome change from Chicago's harsh winter. Through the tall windows, cherry blossoms caught the golden light, their petals dancing on the breeze. Inside the newly renovated recital hall, every seat was filled. Parents, neighbors, and friends squeezed together on the wooden benches, programs rustling in their hands. The stage, once barren and dusty, now gleamed under soft spotlights. Music stands dotted the space, where 30 young musicians sat straight-backed and serious in their concert attire. Some clutched violins, others balanced cellos, and a row of pianists waited by the smaller uprights positioned along the back wall. In the front row, Mrs. Chen, one of Miranda's senior students, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Next to her, Aisha adjusted her camera, capturing every moment for the center's growing social media presence. Reverend Pearl sat in his usual spot near the window, hands folded peacefully in his lap. The room hushed as Eli walked onto the stage, his navy suit catching the light. His steps were measured but confident, arthritis managed now with proper treatment. The past months of regular teaching had given him a newfound energy, visible in the way he carried himself. Miranda followed in a simple blue dress, her hair touched with more silver than when they'd first met, but her eyes bright with purpose. They took their places at the gleaming grand piano, the same one from that fateful night in the Hale Tower lobby, now restored and donated to the center. Their hands found the keys without hesitation, and the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the space. But this time, the music carried something new, not just memory or longing, but joy. As they played, young violinists raised their bows in perfect unison, joining the melody with careful concentration. The sound swelled, supported by cellos and violas, each musician contributing their part to the whole. Some of the children wore second-hand dress clothes, others brand-new concert attire, but on stage they moved as one ensemble. In the third row, a teenage boy who'd been sleeping in the center's temporary shelter 3 months ago now drew his bow with fierce pride, his face intense with focus. Near him, the daughter of a former Hale Systems executive played her viola with equal passion, their different worlds bridged by harmony. Miranda's fingers moved surely across the keys, finding the notes that had once been lost to grief. Each chord seemed to honor Daniel's memory while embracing this new family she'd found. Beside her, Eli's hands danced with familiar grace, his music speaking of Lila's legacy living on in every child who now filled these halls with song. The piece built toward its crescendo, and right on cue, the younger piano students joined in from their uprights, adding simple but crucial notes to the complex tapestry of sound. Even Mrs. Chen, hands trembling slightly, contributed her part, just 2 notes, practiced for weeks until they were perfect. Through the windows, pedestrians stopped on the sidewalk, drawn by the music spilling into the spring evening. Some took out phones to record, others simply stood listening, their faces softened by wonder. Inside, the sound swelled to fill every corner of the hall, lifting up to the newly painted ceiling where soft lights gleamed like stars. As they approached the final measures, Miranda and Eli exchanged a quick glance, or the same look they'd shared at their first performance, but now deepened by months of shared purpose and love. The last chord approached, and every musician leaned forward slightly, ready for their moment. The final notes rang out in perfect unity, from the smallest beginner to the most accomplished player, from elderly hands to young ones, from those who'd been born into privilege to those who'd fought for every opportunity. The sound held, shimmering in the air like a prayer made visible. Through the open doors, the music poured out into the darkness, a beacon of light and hope reaching into the Chicago night. The cherry blossoms outside caught the glow from the windows, each petal illuminated like a tiny star fallen to earth. Inside, the harmony lingered, speaking of second chances, of bridges built, of love that transcended all barriers. The audience held its breath, caught in that perfect moment when music still hangs in the air, before the first person dares to break the spell with applause. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah Eli Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.